Hi, and hello, welcome to the New School. My name is Karen Corney. I'm the director of the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, and really thrilled to present and share with you tonight Natalie Bookchin, who is presenting a talk of focusing on two of her most recent works. I was online all day, as I think many of us were, and came across this really lovely little pronouncement, "Bruised and battered, we are open," which was posted by Postmasters Gallery. And I think we here in New York and in the country all feel that we've reached a point where we are somewhat hurting, but we are open, and in terms of elections and in terms of tonight. So thank you very much for coming on a night when we don't necessarily expect huge crowds. It's really appreciated your effort to be here. The conversation tonight and the presentation by Natalie couldn't be more appropriate for this moment. As some of you know, this series of conversations or presentations is part of a class called Art and the Political, and obviously we're dealing with very political issues in Natalie's work. We are also, because it's election night, making political choices, or at least are thinking and led to believe that we are making these choices, even if they're significantly informed by the media. And then, of course, having this talk here in New York City adds another element of poignancy, since we for sure live in a media-saturated environment here, not just because the mayoral candidate who wins is the one who spent most on his political campaigns, not just because the terms of political appointments are extendable, not just because cultural institutions here are funded by said politician, but also because the news are created and distributed in many ways in the name of this politician. So in a way, we're here in Bloomberg land, and I think it is important to remember that when we later have the opportunity to consider Natalie's work. The talk is entitled "Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See," and it is the title of one of Natalie's works. Natalie herself, as you will see in the programs that I think you've received, is a pioneer in documentary narrative, new media and cinema, and has developed new forms of the documentary on subjects ranging from globalization, isolation, and mass connectivity to labor, technology, and even online DIY dance videos. She's currently at work on a participatory documentary composed of intersecting video diaries made by people in the United States hit hardest by the recession and its aftermath. Natalie's work has been exhibited and screened in this country, on the East Coast, on the West Coast. For instance, the LA County Museum, PS1, MASMOCA, the Walker Art Center, and then in Europe, for instance, at the Pompidou Center in Paris and at the Tate Modern Gallery in London. Natalie is the recipient of grants and awards from Creative Capital, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Daniel Langlois Foundation, the Center for Cultural Innovation, the MacArthur Foundation, and many other institutions. She lives in Los Angeles, is here just for a few days, and serves on the faculty of the Photography and Media program at Cal Arts, and has been there since 1998. Maybe as a little segue to you yourself, Natalie, I just want to quote you here with one comment lifted from an interview with, just blanking on his name, Blake Simpson, thank you very much, where you say that another way to describe what I'm trying to do here in the work that we're going to learn about is to orchestrate a variety of quests to define and describe the self as part of and an agent in a larger social body. The tension is between this depiction of active attempts at self-identification and political subjectivity and that of isolated individuals in an alienated space. And I think that is a very precise description, in my mind at least, where we are today or tonight and during this election night. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Natalie. And a little comment I just want to add quickly is that we will have your presentation, then a public Q&A. And because this gathering is also part of a class, the students will then return after a brief intermission for a little smaller conversation with Natalie herself. Okay, so thank you for coming, and thank you very much, Natalie.
Yeah, well, thanks again for coming out tonight. I've told many people I probably wouldn't be here hearing me tonight, but I really appreciate that you are, because it's a very stressful moment for us all as we wait to find out what's going to happen next. But we won't really know while I'm talking, so unless if anyone is, sort of receives a message or finds out something about a state, speak up and tell everyone else, because I'm not going to be looking right now. So I'm going to, actually, I want to start just by playing without sound. Part of a piece that I made in 2009. So I'm going to talk about a couple of recent projects, one that's in progress and one that's just completed, in which I've been collecting the artifacts of what's known as participatory culture. This new mass form of expression where people point cameras at themselves and perform in front of the camera, sometimes narrating their lives. And I think am I standing too close to that? Is that better? It's kind of ringing. Can you still hear me if I, no? Okay. So, as I was saying, so I've been interested in sort of in looking at and collecting artifacts of participatory culture, including video diaries and what I consider to be video self-portraits, where people are taking cameras, taking smartphones, recording themselves, performing, interpreting the news, reinterpreting kind of scripts of mass culture, and then uploading them to the internet, where they're seen by potentially thousands or even more of viewers. The video diary or the video blog is the most popular of user-generated material that people are uploading online, and people are uploading a lot of video. I just looked up some numbers this morning, and there's about 72 hours of video that's uploaded to YouTube every minute, and 500 years of video are watched every day on Facebook. And most of the stuff that is uploaded is considered to be junk. It's the junk of mass culture, and it sort of ends up in basically a pile of data that remains on a computer and is not really used by anybody or for anything. Okay, I want to just switch to a PowerPoint. But I became interested in this kind of gesture because I think that it reveals something about a genuine need and a genuine desire that people have today to be seen and to be heard, to have their bodies seen, to have their voices heard in a time, in public, in a public space, or in a semi-public space where strangers might encounter it, in a time when we are increasingly polarized politically, where we're economically polarized, where people are struggling very differently depending on what their background is and what they have access to, and also where communication is more and more fragmented and people are, sort of reaching each other and communicating in really kind of virtualized forms, that there, it seems like that there was a relationship between these kinds of impulses, no matter how casual and no matter how, I don't know, in some ways how awkward or, sort of ordinary they were, that there's this kind of contrast between the, sort of the ordinary gesture of a individual pointing a camera at themselves or speaking in front of a camera with an unmade bed behind them, or somebody kind of speaking as if he were a broadcaster, but with a nail on the wall behind him where a picture is supposed to hang. That there's this, there's something very poignant and human in contrast to the overproduced, over-digitized, over-photoshopped kind of media that surrounds our landscape that I wanted to kind of pay more attention to. And so between, beginning in 2009, I began to do a series of projects in which I was reshaping these participatory impulses and trying to reimagine a form that was more social than the one that is, sort of spoken about as social media, which in fact is a platform that structurally prioritizes individuals who are, awarded for popularity, and less popular, less conventional videos sink to the bottom, and there's mostly individuals kind of shouting at and at each other without really having a dialogue. So I was interested in trying to collect this multiple isolated gestures and put them together to see what kind of collective potentials, what kind of social narratives people were producing, and to sort of see what would happen if I took them out of the context of their kind of the isolated sort of single video presentation that's typically the way that you would see a video like this online. And so first piece that I did was called Testament, and in this, oops, it's like going in and out. And in this piece, I made a series of short vignettes where I sort of projected very large in a large room. Each vignette was about 4 to 6 minutes, and clusters of people would come into the room and stand in front of these clusters of speakers who kind of mirrored back to them, kind of with this direct address. This is one of the, it's just a detail of one of the vignettes, and I'm going to just show you one of the series, which is called My Meds, and it's a video vignette that I think in some ways is very precisely characterizes this very peculiar blend of both intimacy and anonymity that these kinds of video diaries point to. Oops.
So I'm going to. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my medications.
I'm on Depakote 500 milligrams. I'm on Seroquel 50 milligrams once before bedtime.
I'm taking
Risperdal.
So that's 40 milligrams of Prozac and half a milligram of Xanax at night.
I'm in the process of switching medication.
From
Lithium,
carbamazepine,
Remeron,
duloxetine,
And it's like
to Prestige.
And now I will take
Ambien,
Ritalin, Adderall, Abilify,
Fluoxetine,
Lexapro,
Paxil,
Lorazepam,
Trazodone.
and Klonopin. And I'm
feeling much better.
Okay, I'm hitting a scene for, oh, I got it. And I'm also going to show you a fragment of another video that was in the installation. In this one, I was thinking about these choruses that I was putting together as a kind of contemporary Greek chorus. And in ancient Greek theater, the choruses were made up of ordinary people from the community who acted as a bridge between the kings and the gods and the audience. And they weren't seen as agents of change, but more as kind of responding and commenting on and reflecting and interjecting in what was happening. And I kind of see that the videos, that these video impulses that people have as sort of doing a similar thing, that they're responding to media, they're responding to the events in people's lives. It's a kind of an echo chamber of the mainstream media, that people watch news stories or experience life events and then speak alone in their rooms out to everyone and no one. But many people have the same impulse at the same time. So this next, when I did this work, this was in 2009, so it was the height of the recession. And I'll show you just 2 minutes of a vignette in which people are kind of talking about the impact of the recession on their own lives.
So today,
really sucked.
in my life,
I went into work.
like any other day,
And my clock in card is missing.
And so my manager comes up to me and he's like,
My bosses called me in the office and said, I want to talk to you.
And I wasn't sure what was going on, but I went down and basically one of the larger people in the company and someone from Human Resources was there.
Somehow
And he
it sounds
started
not
off with,
coming out
well,
of
this is
there.
the part of the job I really don't like.
and I'm like,
Jesse, you
what
don't
the
need to
fuck?
go any
What's
further.
going on?
Tell me
And I was
how
like,
it's
You
going.
firing me?
fired, aren't I?
No.
He says, yes, we're gonna,
And they were like,
perhaps not making enough money.
we're really sorry, you're a really great worker, but unfortunately
The business hasn't been good. The guys have been sitting around the
I
shop
would just sit around
in large
begging
numbers.
people that were walking by to come over, and then the owner cut everybody's hours down to like nothing.
And myself and a lot of other people,
My center and the other
I think a
center,
good 1,000 or so
My
people,
entire department was
600
initially
people were
laid
laid
off, which is it's not a good thing.
Okay. Sorry, the sound was a little off on that, but okay. So those two lead me to the next piece, which is the name of the talk, which is a project called "Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See," which is a project that I just completed last March. And in some way, formally, it was a kind of a response to this last installation where I had these large projections on walls and people were moving, sort of en masse, but kind of in a very stationary way from one projection to another. And I kind of saw this, one of the things that I'm interested in doing is taking this stuff offline to try to kind of imagine and presume something more social than it really is when it's online. And part of that involves producing a space where people can come together and see multiple videos as a group of people, so that there's something, people see themselves not as individuals so much as they're seeing themselves represented as a group. And so there's a kind of mirroring that I hope to happen, but also a kind of a reminder of the embodiedness of all of us, even when we're posting alone online to the screen by ourselves. In this next project, I took the two-dimensionality of the projection on the wall in which I had been taking multiple channels of video and montaging it into a single composition, and I exploded it into space. And so instead of having multiple videos projected on a single wall, in this installation, you were inside the video. You became a part of it. And it's a pretty hard piece to document, but the way that it worked is there were 18 separate monitors that hung from thin cables around the room. And instead of, sort of choreographing in the way I did in the single plane, the narrative, which was 16 minutes, unfolded over space and time. And as a viewer, in order to follow the narrative, you had to constantly shift your body around. And sometimes you couldn't actually see everything at all times, so you were never able to find that sweet spot where you could get it all. And you became very aware as a viewer of your own place physically in the gallery. At the same time, the narrative was a story of. It was a story in which I blended together a number of very well-known media scandals involving famous African-American men, and they were stories that had taken place, sort of during the time that I produced this piece, so in 2009 and 2010. And I never name the protagonist. I never name who the story is about. And so just like you are, as you are standing in the space and you're trying to follow this story, you're also, and physically you're trying to follow it, you're also intellectually constantly trying to sort of locate, who it is they're speaking about. And then as somebody who sort of pays attention to the media, even just slightly, it's very likely that you would recognize who they're talking about. And then as you recognize it, it shifts to somebody else. And so you're continuously shifting you're identifying and then misidentifying at the same time. And the piece for me was very different than this last work, which was about people narrating their own kind of isolation or their own struggles. It was about people narrating other stories about other people, stories about the news. But in the end, it was always the individual pointing the camera at themselves in their room, in their bedroom, with an American flag behind them. So it became, sort of this weird contrast between this, sort of disengaged narration and this incredibly passionate rant about something that was not totally clear why they cared that much about. So I'm going to show you, I'll show you a couple of stills from it. So there would be times when there would only be one person speaking in one part of the room, and then other times when it would kind of erupt into a chorus around certain kinds of key words or sort of things that people were both conflicted over or kind of finding consensus over. So there would be this regular coming together and splitting apart that would take place visually and also in the narrative itself. Okay, so I will show you a clip. And when I made these clips, I tried to kind of create some kind of a simulated montage so you get the sense of screens coming at you from all directions, but it's not you have to use your imagination because it's a very different experience, and you'll see some of the kind of strange looking layers. That was my attempt to simulate the 3D space. Fairly unsuccessfully.
I have the feeling that this could have turned out differently had things not progressed the way that they had. But before we jump to conclusions, we need to make sure we have all the facts.
Let's just look at the facts.
This dude, who also happens to be a black man.
He's no blacker than I am, really. I mean, if you look past skin tone.
I don't know what race you are.
No one knows the first thing about him.
Even his name is a mystery.
You got to show your ID.
Please state your full name and place of birth.
I want to produce his actual birth certificate.
What is the problem with that?
Here's my birth certificate.
He may or may not be born in America.
Where is yours?
He doesn't know if he's
black or white.
I don't see any proof.
There are a lot of questions.
He's just as much white as black.
He needs to be black.
As to whether he is or he isn't.
What a joke.
He needs to understand the language of the streets.
Like,
This makes me ask,
he is a mask.
what
Is he a fraud?
what type of black
According to
man
him, he's more than
says that he's 56% white and he's supposed to be afraid of
Black.
50% of your blood is black and 50% is white.
So he's more of a white guy, and he even said so himself.
He never ever
You don't consider
intended on embracing us.
this guy's one of us.
I haven't seen any evidence.
We have no proof.
Do we know who this man is?
I don't know who that motherfucker is.
Nah.
Do we know what he does?
What's he got to
Yo.
hide? What is he trying to hide?
Break it down.
Yo,
Don't lie to me, boy.
I always thought he was black.
So I'm going to show you
I have.
I'm going to show you another sample, but I just thought of something else that I wanted to say about it, which is that the piece is also an attempt to address something that I think that we're all going through, really acutely now, which is the way that we get the news these days, which is really different than the way we used to get the news, where we get pieces of it, it's very polarized and it's very fragmented. And a lot of the times we get news through secondary and tertiary sources. A lot of the stories that I was downloading and collecting, people were recasting the news. Right? They were word for word. They were, sort of saying what had happened, and then they would talk about one news story, but because it was a personal recasting, they would then slip, and all of a sudden they would start to talk about another scandal. And this kind of slipping, was a kind of goes back to in the beginning when I said I was interested in looking at the kind of DIY flawed presentations, because I think that it sort of says something beyond. It says something more than it actually speaks in words. Like there's something beyond that, like some kind of desire that's being expressed that's not resolved. And I think that, there's this way that, people are using cameras now and using, sort of turning their bedrooms and their private spaces into stages where they're enacting their anxieties and their struggles and their desires, and they're not fulfilled attempts to, they're not realizing anything beyond themselves. But so this was, it was a piece that was very, very difficult to do, to listen to all of this, but it was also kind of fascinating to hear how many people would be saying sort of the same paragraph over and over again, or people would tell a story, but they would tell it from
This could have.
But they would reenact a scandal, but they would take the position of like one character, or someone else would take the position of another. So for me, what was always important in this piece was that you saw before and after people spoke. People stayed on screens for a long time. So you would have people smoking and drinking, because that's what they do. People are kind of living in front of the camera, and then I would fragment a section where they said what I, sort of the choreographed section. But you would also always see my, sort of my edit within that space. So that my partial view also became a part of the piece, sort of everyone's partial view of the story, as well as mine as the scripter. Okay, so let me show you the other, this is somewhere in the middle of the narrative.
I really can't think of too many of our black famous people who have not gotten caught up in some type of scandal or conspiracy.
I would really hate to see any type of assassination attempt,
some type of
any type of
violent
violence
act or
against society.
something.
Who's gonna kill the black man?
show some respect to the man. Aside all the crazy media stuff, all the tabloids, he has problems, yeah.
He makes mistakes.
He doesn't have problems.
What would you do if he was rich?
It's just really sad,
If you were rich?
I guess when you got that much
because
money,
the more money you
you
have,
just gotta go and fuck shit up.
the more problems you have.
I'm sure if you
He's
were
always been
Been spotlight since you were 6 years old, abusive parents, like all types of shit going on, cameras in your face.
All these people that put them on a pedestal.
On a big ass pedestal.
Put these motherfuckers on a pedestal.
And expect them to perform at this high level and live at this high
holding
level.
them to a higher than
Hold these guys to
human
high
standard.
standards.
But we don't want to see any impurity in this facade.
You were, you know, a guy that a lot of
Young
people
children of
including
all
kids.
ethnicities.
You know, a lot of kids looked at minorities or even white kids or whatever. I'm not gonna make race an issue.
You were accepted by the white kids.
He's gonna give us all these stupid views, and he's gonna mold our minds so that we think just like him.
What do you think 8-year-old boys and girls are, you know, asking their parents when they're seeing you and the supermarket tile boys?
And then when we grow up, we'll be like, oh,
He's a pedophile.
he's a kid at heart, and he loves children.
He's a socialist and he's going to be indoctrinated into their children. Oh
Yo, this guy's like a fucking god.
I want to be just like him.
This guy, chicks and guys were fainting at his presence.
Oh, what a icon.
He's a hero.
Mr. Perfect. The Savior's coming.
The greatest thing that has ever been.
He's going to save the world.
The second coming.
They bow down to him. They
He's
worship.
wonderful. He can do no
Oh,
wrong.
he's the Messiah. He's gonna
And
save us all.
It disturbs me.
No, he's not.
Not that I didn't vote for the man.
I've said
He
this
has feet of
from the
clay.
beginning.
But
He is no God.
Always looking for a Messiah. He's not Jesus, not Buddha, he's not Muhammad, he's nothing but a man.
He's not the Almighty.
No, he's not the Messiah.
He's a human being, just like you and I.
He's human.
We need to have a childhood, and humans make mistakes.
They make mistakes.
He's just a normal dude.
Nobody's perfect.
They have sin
So why in the heck should we judge him?
in their lives.
Person like everybody else.
What makes him exempt from being human? Then that brings me to the other thing. Everybody's all upset. Because he is. Because he's black. There, I said it.
There's this high-pitched sound now. Is that? Okay. So there's a lot more to talk about with that piece, and I want to have a conversation about it. But we'll do that during Q&A. I want to just switch and talk about a new project that I'm working on right now, just to give a kind of counterpoint to that work. So this is the piece that I'm going to talk about. I actually haven't talked about it in public before because it's a brand new piece. I've just begun production of it in July. It comes out of a project that I did as an advocacy film for a poverty-fighting organization in the Bay Area in 2011. That's what prompted it, but that was a piece that I did, sort of for a fundraiser, and it was a finite project, but it kind of compelled me to do this project. And when as I was working on Now He's Public and Everyone Can See, I was asked to do somebody from an organization had seen my installation of the samples that I had showed you previously and thought that that would be like a really kind of interesting form for them to have people, sort of who were served by their organization tell their stories using video diaries and have me come up with a, sort of a collectively told story. So that's the backstory to it. What I want to talk about in the context of this class and also sort of my work in general is that it's the piece that I'm doing now is a kind of exact opposite in that all of the participation that I elicit in this previous work is without permission. I'm not asking people to participate. They're participating because they've uploaded stuff online, and so it's fair use, and I'm using it. I always put my stuff back online, and I send links to people so that who are in it, so they can respond, because I feel like, as much as I want to take it offline and have it sort of create a embodied experience that you don't get online, I also think it's important to circulate it in the space in which the material is drawn. This project involves real participation. It's a documentary that will be both a feature-length film. It's going to be it's a large archive that I'm building, and it will also be an online story archive. And it tells a story that is missing right now from the news, and that's missing online. And that is the story of the 15% and the 1 out of 3 Americans. It's 15% of Americans right now, or people living in the United States, live in poverty. 1 out of 3 people living in the United States are living in poverty or near poverty. And there are 4 million people whose only income right now is food stamps. In the election, though, during the election coverage and all of the reporting, FAIR and Accuracy in the Media, which is a watchdog group, a media watchdog group, collected 10,000 stories. And out of all those 10,000 stories, 0.02% or 10 of them covered poverty in a substantial way. So it's not being covered in election politics, which kind of makes sense because people who are struggling with 2 jobs and people who don't have homes are not the target audience, right? They're not the target audience for advertisers, and they're not the target audience for the politicians. The FAIR has also done a lot of studies about news reporting over the years since 2007, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the coverage of poverty is shockingly low. There are so many stories about the struggling middle class, so many, because we're the ones who are reporting, we're the ones who are consuming the news, and we are, we're struggling. But people who are struggling the most aren't being heard, and they're not speaking for themselves when stories are covered in the media about people in poverty. The only time they come in to speak is when, they are given short sound bites to talk about their suffering. But then experts come in and, explain the situation and define it. So what I'm doing in this project is using what I think of as the best features of so-called participatory culture, which is that 1, it's very easy to publish, self-publish. 2, there's a way that with this ease of publication that new kinds of expert knowledge begins to surface, with whether it's film reviews, art reviews, food reviews, the telling of the news, there's this possibility of hearing different voices, of giving platforms to people who are not usually considered experts. And and then it's also, these new technologies are really cheap and really easy to use. And so what I am doing is I've been going out with a team, and we've been making video diaries. So that in order to make a film in which people who are experts in their own lives, people who are experiencing the greatest obstacles in this country, can talk about what they think needs to be done in order to solve the poverty crisis. What is it that they're facing every day? What are the stories that they want to tell the middle class or the wealthy? And so I've been putting all of this together, and then once I collect a big archive, I'm making a film that will have a couple of chapters. One is, the first one, which is the one I'm working on now, and I'll show you a sample of, is homelessness in Los Angeles, which is it's big everywhere, but it's huge in Los Angeles. And so the second chapter, or another chapter, will be about the working poor, so people who, because most of the poor in this country are actually working. And then the third will be about the new poor, which is actually the one that gets covered the most in the news, because that's the former middle class who was hit by the recession. Most people who are living in deep poverty didn't notice. Okay, it was bad before, and it's still bad. But there are a lot of people who have slipped into poverty. And so that'll be the third chapter. And I'm making these video diaries in a form that is both timely and it's very recognizable, but it's what's not recognizable is that the voices and the faces that then get inserted into this kind of popular form, you know, which I think will be a way that both, you know, allows people to, I mean, people are making their own diaries, they're making their own portraits, they're deciding what they want to tell and what they don't want to tell and what they want to share. And the archive online will be an open source platform that will both have the fragmented edits that I produce, but will also allow you to see the whole story that people have, the story that people have shared. So it'll show, it'll go beyond the single edit that I've made. Okay, so yeah, I've made a lot so far, but these are just stills from the videos. And everyone here is homeless. Okay, so I'm going to show you a very rough cut, which is a section that is people talking about how it feels to be homeless. It's about 4 to 5 minutes. And it's just kind of gives you a little tiny bit of a sense of how people are talking about their situation.
Nice apartment. I lived in Tahunga, had a pretty nice apartment. I actually had a real nice apartment, and just issues that financially I just couldn't pay the rent there. Zach at that point in time wasn't really established with work and money, so I had to move. And I went into a shelter for the first time 5 years ago. So I'm getting ready to write a book, I think, called Never Say Never, because
I never thought that I would be in a situation like this.
I never thought. I was middle class.
That I would end
I had a
up
very good job.
homeless.
I never thought that I would be homeless. Never. You know?
Homelessness does a funny thing to people, you know, it's because as human beings we're not meant to be homeless.
If you don't experience it, you'll never know. You'll never know how it feels. You'll never know what we go through, how we feel, how bad we feel.
It kind of brings down your self-esteem when you're homeless.
It starts to work on you.
And it is. It takes a toll on your spirit.
And it's extremely stressful.
It just brings you down to be homeless.
You know, and each day that I'm out here, my spirit gets torn down little by little. Little by little. Being in a homeless situation, you feel hopeless. You know,
I feel like
nobody cares.
I don't care, you know.
It was just me. It was just me to deal with whatever I was going through.
I'm going to tell you something. Man, oh man, oh man. You really want to know who your real friends are? Become homeless.
Nobody chooses to be homeless. I didn't choose to be homeless. My dad put my family out. I didn't choose to be homeless. I didn't want to be homeless. It's nothing fun. It's nothing enjoyable to know that you're homeless and your peers that you went to high school with, to not tell them that you're homeless because your fear of being judged. Are they going to look at you different? Or are you going to be judged because you're homeless with your kids? It's very hard. It's very hard. It's even harder when you're an African-American female.
I don't fit the profile of being homeless. I mean, someone told me I have a $150 haircut, nice glasses.
There's so many stereotypes, you know, and they look at your race and your gender and they'll say something like, oh, she wants to, she can go get a job. I work, why can't you? You know, or it's not, you know, are you thinking they're alcoholics or crackheads or drug addicts or whatever the case may be?
You
But
thought
then
it.
when I became homeless, I seen a whole different side. It's not like that. Most people don't understand being homeless is a job. It is a 24-hour-a-day job.
Now, let's just say a homeless person wants to go and get a job. You know, some jobs are like, well, we're not homeless friendly. We don't even have a title called homeless friendly. You know?
You go to the unemployment office, you try to
When you're
look for
single
jobs.
mom, you also have to worry about child care.
You try to put your best foot forward, you know,
I
but
tried.
somebody
It's so hard to get hired.
it doesn't work.
Different. I never got a call back, and this was in 4 years. I never received a call back. No one ever emailed me. I got
your confidence
Monster
level
and
down.
Career Builders. And I'm coming in the interview, leaving from a Walmart bathroom,
We're not
freshening up,
playing on the same
from
playing
sleeping in
field,
my car
you
at
know.
night. When you don't have that cell phone,
We
where they can
get looked at
contact you,
differently.
or you don't have that address, it's like your application automatically goes straight to the trash.
I just feel like even if we try, even if we do what we need to do, even if we're out there every day trying to uprise out of this situation, I still feel down. I still feel like whatever I do is not enough at the end of the day.
I notice, it's funny because I notice the way I used to look at homeless people and then have somebody look
I would
at
just
me
be
that
out there.
way is
And I would see homeless people.
hard.
I would see them
It was
walking
people
by,
on the side of the
asking for
road
change.
who asked for change.
You know, I'd give them some change.
And I was one of those people who
But
drove
at the
past.
same time, I didn't realize I would ever be one of them on the streets. You know?
Okay, so I'm gonna stop so we can have a Q&A.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Hi. You're saying I just came from Germany. You already said that you kind of you feel like on one hand you have this spatial component to the work, but you also feed it back to the networks through which you gain the material in order to then have also the opportunity for those who you represent to also maybe see the work and comment on it. What kind of what kind of feedback do you receive from those people who are your actors?
Very, very little. With Laid Off, with the one about people losing their jobs, I got 4 very enthusiastic responses, which you can see on YouTube. For Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See, I actually, there's one guy who I had used his, there was an article that was published about the work before it was shown, like a preview in the LA Times, and it was in the paper version. Apparently, one of the guys, I didn't know this, whose picture was in the paper, used to live in LA. A friend scanned the picture, sent it to him. He posted it on his blog and wrote a little like enthusiastic blurb about the show, and he was very excited that his name was in the paper. That was the only response I got for that one. And yeah, I get less response than, I mean, people view it online, but they don't comment on it.
Somewhat related question. Considering the distinction between your own work and everything else that you have filmed, but that is not part of the installation or the final film, how do you make the distinction, and what is the reason to make both versions available?
Is your question about for the newest piece?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are 3 versions. I'll say it again, just to explain it better. For the newest project, It's very different than the others in that it's not made for art. It's not an art piece. I didn't get grant as an artist. I presented myself as a documentarian, and I got a grant for that, which means that the first iteration of the project, it's a MacArthur Foundation grant. They know I'm an artist, but it wasn't really how I presented it. And so the first place that it will be seen will be on television as a film. That's a really big challenge for me because I just made this piece that was 18 channels in a space, and that embodiment was really important for me. Sort of taking something offline and putting it on. But what I'm doing here is the opposite, in that I'm taking something that's out there in the world, that's offline, that's not online, that's not in media. So it needs to not be in a gallery space because it needs to be circulating amongst the stories that are already out there, because it's about visibility. It's about having people be heard. So I'm going to give you a long answer. So that's the second part of that, is that I'm working in a way that's very different than a conventional documentarian, in that I'm starting by building an archive. And the archive will be filled with hundreds of stories that people are making. And not all of those stories are going to be in the film. But I think of that project of building an archive as in a tradition of visual archives. Let's say the visual archive that was made in the 1930s when photographers traveled across the country and documented the Depression. And that is now available freely at the Library of Congress for people to use. These are stories that they're amazing. They're amazing stories, and they're not being heard. I haven't heard them. And so for me, the reason I want to, so the second part of the project is that I want to make a web documentary, which means that I want to put the film in its entirety online. But when I put it online, because I'm going to be using I'm kind of building composite characters, right, out of many speakers, rather than sort of the traditional narrative of following single characters, right? You're going to be following, but it won't be one or two characters. I want to, one of the parts of the installations that was really important for me is that you always see the fragmentation that I'm making. You see my edits, and you see the partiality of sort of my curation. If I made a film, the reason I want to put it online is so that you have the multiple fragments of the film showing up with a timeline underneath it, so you can see the part that I've edited, and then you can click on a single video in the montage and go to a story archive where you can see that video, sort of a longer version of that video and other videos that are like it. And then you can share them, and then you can so it will be a way that people can kind of send this out and circulate it. So, because my goal is to have these stories out there and not to be just a part of a longer film. So that's part of the reason, because I want them to be used freely. And I also think that it's a way to show the sort of what's missing from what I'm saying. I'm not saying, I'm listening and I'm editing, right? That's where my voice comes in, right?
I have a question. Do you mind waiting for my probably can be heard anyway, but I just had a question about the voice, and particularly voice as it relates to agency. And I was really wondering, in your latest work about documenting poverty in Los Angeles, is it Los Angeles or is it both coasts, the country, right? So talking about these particular people and their stories, and you mentioned a couple of times that you're interested in having their voices heard, and I am interested about the question of having a voice and having agency. In what ways are these subjects or participants then being exploited, and we're really there's this kind of victimization and looking at them as not necessarily agents and having agency and being empowered, as opposed to just being used. I don't know, I'm just asking about the connection to the macro, a little bit bigger in terms of agency and empowerment. Does it?
And you think that they're being exploited and they're...
I'm not sure. I'm just asking because this is just the rough cut. You have just started with this project. And yeah, I'm just curious about the relationship of agency and voice, because sometimes we can talk and we can be speaking but not have our voices heard. And that's where that kind of conflicting agency and power comes into place.
I was a little hesitant to show this one sample, but it's the only finished little sample I have because it is about how people feel. And so it's, you know, there is this sense that people are suffering and they're saying that they're struggling. There's sections where people also talk about what they think needs to be done about poverty in America. And I would love to have edited that. I've actually been in New York for 2 weeks on a laptop, so I can't edit right now. So. And for me, the main goal of the project is to, I mean, the main goal, one of the goals is to counter the kinds of representations that there are right now about people, which is either it's invisible or it's stereotypical. And there's a lot of, I mean, you know, sort of, Salvation Army did a survey of perceptions of poverty in 2012. A majority of people think that people are poor because they don't want to work and that they're lazy and that, I mean, there's unbelievable kinds of stereotypes. It really exist because there's no alternative. So one of my goals is to listen to people, you know, sort of talk about what misperceptions that they're living with and what they think that the public that's going to see this, because they all know that the public that's going to see this is middle class and wealthy. And those are the, so one of the questions is, you know, what do you want to say to people? And we have found that, me and my team have found that people are really empowered by that. They also get paid for making their video. Everyone gets $20, which is a little bit of money, but for somebody who, you know, makes a few hundred in 2 weeks, it's also, it's something, and it sort of further kind of gives value to what they're saying, and they all get credit. They also all get to see the video after they make it to decide what they want to include and what they don't want to include. So your question is an extremely important one, because I'm not, you know, just like, you know, sort of I'm in my work, I'm always sort of walking a line because I'm not making autobiographical work, right? I'm making work about the things that other people are talking about. And I see my role more as a listener, but I'm also very, sort of aware of the history of these kinds of questions, you know, in the 1930s victim documentary, and not wanting to be a part of, you know, sort of that tradition, because it's a huge one and it's one that's still very pervasive. So yeah, so listening and being careful about, you know, sort of how people are speaking and what they're saying is a really important part of what I'm trying to do. But it's also very much at the beginning. So.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing your work with us. It's really fascinating. Well, and especially to see the sort of former and now the current work you're doing and the fundamental contrast that really does exist. Just to follow up on the comment that was just made, I was wondering if you pay attention to how each of your subjects in the new work is being filmed aesthetically, formally, if you're really trying to simulate the video diary format that exists online. There were a couple of characters or subjects who really seem to capture that feeling of sitting in her bedroom with her camera alone, talking to herself, trying to find that voice and that, to have a kind of desperate moment with oneself. And that doesn't often come across in some of the other interviews, and they come across as interviews. So there's a kind of shuttling between the interview format and the diary format.
It's a great question. This is why I like to show work in progress, because it's sort of the things that I'm still struggling with and thinking about. The way that I was using the video diary in the previous work was sort of, in a way, metaphorically speaking about people isolated in their bedrooms, right? Isolated, alone, and then also at the same time, sort of being very public, right? Like that kind of contrast. in this one, I'm thinking about that metaphor of people isolated and alone, and also saying the same thing as speaking more to the experience of poverty, which is one that is really isolating, even though it's so social, right? It's caused by structural kinds of issues, right? It's a structural problem, it's a social problem, and there's only going to be a social solution to it. And people sort of experience it in a particular culture in ways that are similar, which is why the piece won't just, I want to do different aspects of poverty in different locations. So poverty in like homelessness in Los Angeles will be very different than unemployment in Ohio. So I want to pick a couple of key places to deal with the different aspects of it so it's not generalized and universalized. The question of form that you're asking is, I think that when people, originally we were going to have people just do their diaries without us in the room, but most people wanted us to be there because they wanted to have, sort of the prompting. Many people have never made a video diary before, right? Or filmed themselves in front of a camera. And so at the same time, I didn't want it to be a therapeutic exchange, which I think can happen in an interview where you forget about the camera and then you reveal things about yourself that then the cameraman gets and, sort of uses. I wanted there to be a performative element where people see themselves and compose themselves and talk to themselves, imagining they're talking to a community. They're not talking to me or the other interviewers that will do I don't do all of them. And so that I wanted it to feel like sort of casual and very low-fi, which is part of why I'm using the video diary. I wanted it also to refer to, sort of this kind of social media that the rest of the country and the rest of the world is engaging in, sort of to inserted in that space. So that's part of the reason. So it's like the metaphor, the kind of seeing oneself as they speak. Like those are all the reasons that I've chosen to do it that way. I didn't want it to be an overproduced, but I also didn't want to photograph people in the stereotypical way that, you see a homeless person like, kind of with poorly dressed, not washed on the street. I wanted people to present themselves in the way they wanted to present themselves. And so to kind of contrast that kind of a representation, which is a very familiar one, like you could all conjure it up without even seeing it. And people are often surprised, people are surprised to see when I say these are people who are homeless, right? My nephews were anyway. I haven't shown it to that many people.
I have a question about your YouTube-based works. To me, they seem to be highly anthropological. And I wonder if I see the thesis of those works as being sort of about a collective consciousness between people. And I guess with that, and in relation to the ones that focus on news stories, I'm wondering how time plays in with those, because with the way media is today, it's a 24-hour news cycle and everything's going incredibly fast. I wonder what sort of permanence these topics can have within the pieces, I guess.
Do you mean, yes, anthropology, there is that. I'm not sure how to answer that, except I think that maybe I can answer it in terms of now he's out in public and everyone can see. I showed that piece in Croatia over the summer and also presented it in a lecture. And even though most people there actually did know many of the stories too, but even when they didn't, they could relate sort of the kinds of narrations. And I didn't know that they would be able to. I didn't think it would be able to be understood outside of an American context, but it was. And people could apply their own experience, sort of their own kinds of conflicts with immigration and with racism in their own cultures to it. So yes, I think that it sort of taps into a very timely sort of moment. They all do. But I think that I see the work as documentary in that it sort of speaks to I mean, it's a kind of new type of documentary, but it is about a place in time that's particular, but I think that particularity can, sort of, hopefully it'll be something that would be, sort of telling about our times when it's no longer recognizable in the same way, when we no longer have YouTube. Like, what was this strange thing that people were doing? Why were they dancing in front of the camera and uploading it for 10,000 people to see?
Hi. Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the editing process itself, because as a documentary maker, it's like a crucial part, like the editing process and this particular kind of work that you do with all these choreographic elements and matching, graphic matching, and looks like very time consuming and very, detailed. So I would like you to talk a little bit about the kind of routines or process that you go through while you're visualizing everything and editing the piece. Thanks.
The piece really is post-production, especially the previous work. It is all about the post-production. And so I think of the editing as writing. Like, I don't, that's when I'm writing my story. When I started doing Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See, I mean, you didn't see the whole 16 minutes, so it's hard to kind of get a sense of what the narrative is. But it started out, it was going to be about Tiger Woods and that scandal, because that scandal was so performative, and it raised so many kinds of questions that went beyond Tiger Woods, with his white wife, with his, sort of not identifying as black originally, with how, sort of people talked about him becoming black. I mean, it became about the malleability of, like, the struggle over racial identity. And I'm bringing it up as in terms of editing, because the way that I discovered what the piece was about was by watching all the videos. And as I was watching the videos, people would be performing the Tiger Woods scandal, and they would start to talk about Michael Jackson, or then they would start to talk about Obama, and sort of some other kind of racial media generated sort of racialized scandal that took place. And so that was sort of by watching. So I think my role as an editor is as a watcher and listener. I mean, because the piece is very language based, so a lot of it is like I listen first, and then without paying that much attention to the image. And I'm sort of doing it. I'm thinking about music and rhythm, and yeah, it's really detail oriented, but it's also really fun because I'm working with material that's very, like, it's not boring. So. And then in terms of process, like more technical things, like I might write out what people are saying and then cluster it together by types. I have no idea how I'm going to do it with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage, though. Because each video diary that we're doing now is about 40 minutes. So YouTube videos are 10 minutes. So, it's kind of scaling it up. And so there will probably have to be something more systematic in the way that I'm editing. I do it all myself. The film producers in that other world are telling me I need to get an editor just because everybody gets an editor. But I'm not sure, because editing for me is where I make my work.
Natalie, in the back here, I apologize, I've got a bad cough. As a video historian, I might have a suggestion for you, because I think what you're doing isn't exactly as new as it seems, although in the context of new media, that puts a different frame around it. But back in the early 80s, Wendy Clark made something called the Love Tapes. And for people who are not familiar, Wendy is the daughter of the great filmmaker Shirley Clark. And these were not called diaries, but they were before StoryCorps, they were time-limited works where someone got in front of a video camera, selected a piece of music, and talked about love for a set period of time. And these were then put together in reels, and they were made all over the United States initially, and then it took a global turn. But they were done in places like Grand Central Station, in prisons, in daycare centers. It was a really fascinating phenomenon that had a structure to it, but a great deal of freedom in which people did get to say what they wanted to say with only the limitation of time, with no one interfering. Interfering is too strong a word, but imposing an editorial judgment. And I guess I'm sharing this simply to say that I both appreciate what you're claiming for yourself here, and yet I'm a little bit troubled by the notion that the editing doesn't do to these stories the very same thing that was once criticized of the photographers during Stryker's administration of the Farm Security Administration, that there was a manipulation of reality and that another judgment, another perspective is imposed. And I think your aspirations are remarkable, but I guess I'm a little bit puzzled about how much the stories of the people are not unmediated by you. And just one more thing that I would say as an example of that, the sequence that we saw, particularly of the women speaking, maybe because of my age, I associated particularly with the older woman whose haircut looked too good for her. And I kept thinking to myself, how much does the way in which this is edited and structured and the cross-cutting between figures begin to affect the way the viewer begins to think about the issues as distinct from people making a diary, putting it up, and that's the end of it.
So, yeah, I like the love tapes too, and I never would claim that what I'm doing is brand new and original. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the first thing. That's definitely an influence. I also wouldn't claim that my editing isn't mediation. I think it very much is mediation. I don't know what wouldn't be mediation. So I think that what I try to do is make that mediation visible, that you can see my edit. It's, sort of fragmented. I also I'm making a film, I have a point of view, but my point of view is emerging through what I'm hearing. It's still going to be my point of view, but I'm learning, I'm coming in not living that experience and not knowing that much about it, and learning from people and then making a film based on that. And I guess that's the best I can do.
In the way you conceive and construct the narrative, and the way you engage the viewer in your installations. Now, the narrative, the way you edit, does it repeat itself? Is a repeatable loop, or every time continuously changes?
No, it's a loop.
So always you have constructed the clusters of portraits.
It's a story. It's a story that gets told. So you're watching it. You're just watching it in space.
So my question is, when you construct this story, it doesn't have a linearity, though.
It does have a narrative.
It does.
It is. Yeah, there's a narrative.
So how do you choose to construct the narrative? Because you are continuously cutting into voices from one person to the other. How you are expecting, or you don't care how I'm going to read your narrative? In other words, do I try to make a linear narrative, or I just try to make my own narrative, just sampling words from one person to the other?
I guess I wasn't clear when I showed it. It's a linear narrative. It's just a linear narrative that unfolds in space. So the way you're showing it, when you go from one screen to the other, then as a viewer I'm following it. It shows up in different parts of the room.
I see. Okay.
So you hear it continuously. You can't always see it all.
I see.
So yeah, But it's a very, I mean, it's a kind of conventional linear narrative. There's a beginning and an end, but it's also in a loop because it's in a space. So.
It's very difficult, as you said.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to know the people who were interviewed around homelessness, did they choose their locations? Because the location with the books, to me, is very powerful. It contradicts the general discourse on homelessness. So I was curious, because I think there's 2 interviews that were in front of books. And when you were present for the interviews, did you ask questions, or were they really talking from their, I mean, how did they navigate their talking?
So we have been presenting the project at house meetings in shelters and at lunches and at workshops that people are doing or trying to get jobs, and sort of explaining the project and seeing if people are interested in participating. And then we go to a room in the location because we want to have a private space. So all the locations are in the organizations. And I didn't want to go out onto the street. I wanted it to be in a location because I think that, there's what people are saying is also contradicting the stereotypes about homelessness. And I also didn't want, sort of to reproduce that by photographing people waking up in the morning in the street, because it didn't seem necessary. I'm more interested in people's language and how people are describing, how they articulate and describe their own situations, rather than, sort of following them around and showing those situations. So this way, people are choosing what it is they want to describe. It's their language and it's their performance. And so I have a series of ever-evolving prompts that I give people to consider and think about beforehand. And then we have been recently going in the room with people because that's what they've wanted. And people answer the questions that they want to. They often want us to ask questions. And some people just go off on talking about whatever they want to talk about. So we kind of follow people. We let people narrate it themselves. And then there's also people at any point can say, you know what, scratch that, cut that, and then I'll cut that out. So they kind of, it's somewhere in between a personal diary narration and an interview. It varies for different people. But I do always want people to, I sort of always bring in the question of what do you think, sort of the question about misperceptions, the questions about definitions of poverty, because poverty itself is not something that many people want to self-identify as, rightfully so, because it's, there's so much stigma, and it's also a condition, not an identity, that people are trying to get out of. And so, sort of the language itself is really important, and so I want people to kind of think about and address that, because I think that there can only be a self-definition of, someone's economic status, and then also to talk about solutions, because why what is existing right now isn't working. Because I'm interested in building a story that gives enough context and enough frame through people's voices. So I don't know how I'll do that, but that's what I'm trying to do.
We should probably soon close, but I have a question about whether you could elaborate on the notion of the archive. I mean, it's such an incredibly valuable collection that you create and come across. How do you envision it being used in the long run? And I'm thinking, for instance, of the what is it called, the archive. The Arab Image Foundation, which collects existing documentary photography and then makes it available to researchers or artists to create their own stories based on these documents that they have come across in the archive. Could you talk a bit more about this treasure of hundreds and hundreds of hours that you're making in collaboration with the protagonists?
I mean, in the short run, the archive, any organization that organizations have been very responsive, because it gives people a chance to speak who are not being heard, and I think they see that as valuable. Giving all the footage back to people if they want it. So if individuals want their footage, they get it. If the archive wants if the organization wants the footage to use as promotion on their site, they get it. So it's open in that way. And in the future, I mean, it could be, I don't know, it's hard to say right now how it could be used. I mean, it could be educational, it could be, I mean, hopefully it would be, besides just being a document. Because it is a document of, it's a portrait of who we are in America right now that's not being, that's not so, I mean, many people are doing it. I'm not the only one, but I am interested in creating this particular archive to add to that collection, because I'm not seeing it online and I'm not seeing it in the media. So if it's being done, then it needs to be done more. So.
One last question in the back. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I just had another follow-up question on the location, the context for the homelessness pieces. I was wondering if because you're saying that you're focusing on language, but then you have a couple different environments or stages set up for them. Do they choose which place they want to be presented in? Because I definitely agree that I like that. I thought that, oh wow, this person actually isn't shot on the street, victimized, they're inside, and it's breaking stereotype. But I'm also just wondering if they're choosing their story, do they also get to choose the backdrop? And then my second question is about your image, about this new archive that you're going to be accumulating. Are you interested in working on with maybe some kind of digital archivist developers that could maybe make a new kind of search engine that would search for words, or, I mean, I guess because you're mostly interested in language, maybe just pick out words that people say, because that would be a faster way. I mean, it's obviously, you don't want to be too mechanical where it just pulls up these one words in every video, but a new kind of image search.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, I think that most archives that I come across online where it's just piles and piles of videos end up being dead. And so part 2 of the project would be building a dynamic, active interface where it would be searchable in a way that would hopefully invite more use rather than just to keep it dead. So yes, that's like sort of dealing with that kind of interface is something that I have in mind for the future, for sure. People get to choose where they want to be filmed, and they also get to choose how they're framed and what they want behind them. A lot of people don't seem to care that much, but some people do, and people will adjust it and raise the camera and lower it and shift things around, because I'm trying to sort of make it, I mean, as I explain it to people when they're making it, that this is their portrait. It's their self-portrait. And so they can do it as they like. Some people are more interested in that. Most people are more interested in what in speaking than they are about the image. But people do get dressed up for it, which I think is so nice. And some people don't, but we're doing a lot. So we're getting all kinds of stories. So thank you very much for taking the time.